My name is Nan Cohen. I had the opportunity to attend the Spirit, Commerce, and Sustainability Conference that was held here in downtown Missoula during the weekend of September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. I had the privilege of being on the film crew. We're going to present to you right now Paul Hawken's keynote address at that conference. Paul Hawken is a very, very successful businessman, and he has a warm heart to match. He's the author of the book entitled Natural Capitalism. There were many, many people who brought this conference to us. They include the Caring for Creation Network and Women's Voices for the Earth. For information, please feel welcome to contact Women's Voices for the Earth. They're located at 114 West Pine in downtown Missoula, and their phone number is 543-3747.
Good evening. What a wonderful crowd. My name is Bryony Schwann. I'm the Executive Director of Women's Voices for the Earth, an organization that's based here in Missoula, and I'd like to welcome you to the Spirit, Commerce, and Sustainability Conference. Before I start, I would like to thank our co-sponsors and the people who so generously donated to help this event happen. And I'll just go through them. Think, a division of Ford Motor Company, KPIX TV, Montana News Station, Fisher Radio Regional Group, the University of Montana School of Business, Missoula County Government, the University of Montana Excellence Fund, National Audubon Society, Balance Technologies, the Missoulian, Patagonia, and the list goes on. We have numerous friends, and I hope you will take a moment to look in your program to all the people who contributed other donations and money towards the conference, and they are listed in your programs. And I know that several of them came in just in the last week, and they're on that extra sheet of paper, and really take a moment to look at it because we are very grateful to them to make this whole event possible. The extent of environmental degradation at the close of the 20th century threatens the existence of life on Earth as we know it. Global warming, toxic pollution, resource depletion, and the loss of biodiversity are problems symptomatic of an unchecked, unsustainable use of space and resources by humanity. Harvard conservation biologist E.O. Wilson estimates that the current global rate of species loss at 10,000 species per year, compared to 1,000 species per year in the 1970s. Theo Colburn, a senior scientist with the World Wildlife Fund, warns that over the past 50 years, synthetic chemicals became so pervasive in the environment and in our bodies that it is no longer possible to define a normal, unaltered human physiology. Such rapid change threatens a collapse of Earth's ecosystems, a scenario with staggering social and environmental implications. Yet despite millions of dollars spent every year by an ever-growing environmental movement, the state of our environment continues to deteriorate at an alarming rate. The protection and restoration of the Earth will require a fundamental shift in human values and behavior. How can ecological and economic goals be reconciled? How can we revolutionize the relationship between business and the environment? Peter Senge, author of The Fifth Discipline, says, "I believe that the only real alternative to our take, make, and waste society lies in a revolution of aspiration and inspiration. The aspiration must come from us, from seeing the world we intend to leave our children and their children. The inspiration will come from shared understanding of the principles for an economic system consistent with how nature works, and from seeing that it can be done, thanks to book thanks to books like Paul Hawken's Natural Capitalism. It is this revolution of aspiration and inspiration that has been so eloquently provided in Paul Hawken's writing that we will explore at this conference. And I've been struggling over the last few days to find the right words to talk about this conference because it's an incredibly complex subject. The marriage of the spirit, our daily karmas, our daily business lives, and what we do as personal individuals. And I had to just trust that somehow the words would come to me. And yesterday I jumped on my email, and I'm part of a toxics listserv, which usually just has very boring toxic stuff about medical waste incinerators and dioxin and all these other studies. And one of my colleagues posted this quote, and he titled it The Quote of the Millennium, and I thought it was very applicable to this conference, so I wanted to share it with you. The extent of environmental, oh, sorry, wrong page. Back to my, pulled the one wrong. That is not the quote of the millennium. And this is from, and I hope I don't butcher his name too badly, Václav Havel, the writer and first president of the independent Czech Republic. It would be unfair to ignore the numerous projects for averting environmental dangers. However, all attempts of this kind have one thing in common. They do not touch the seed from which the threats sprout, but merely try to diminish their impact. It is my deep conviction that the only option is a change in the sphere of the spirit, in the sphere of human consciousness. We must develop a new understanding of the true purpose of our existence on Earth. Perhaps the real issue is a crisis of respect for the moral order, a crisis of respect for any kind of authority higher than our own earthly being, with its material and thoroughly ephemeral interests. In the process, we have lost our certainty that the universe, nature, existence, our own lives, are the works of creation that have meaning and purpose. I am not an expert on religion, but it seems to me that the major faiths have more in common than they're willing to admit. They share a basic point of departure, that this world and our existence are not freaks of chance, but rather part of a mysterious yet integral act. And they share a kind of catalog of moral imperatives that this mysterious act implies. Perhaps the way out of our current bleak situation could be found by searching for what unites the various religions, a purposeful search for common principles. Then we could cultivate human coexistence while at the same time cultivating the planet in which we live, suffusing it with the spirit of this ethical common ground, what I would call the common spiritual and moral minimum. Could this be a way to stop the blind, perpetual motion dragging us toward hell? It is with these thoughts that I welcome you to the Spirit, Commerce, and Sustainability Conference. Our hope is that when you leave here, you will gather in coffee houses, in churches, in your temples, in your wild places, and you will gather your thoughts and ideas and your inspirations from this conference, and you will talk about how we can collectively work toward a different common good. Thank you very much. And you're probably wondering why I'm up here, because actually Pat Williams, Honorable Pat Williams, our former congressman, was supposed to introduce Paul Hawken tonight, but unfortunately he got called away by the university. So I'm trying to replace him. But I do want to read to you quickly a letter from Senator Max Baucus. Greeting, friends. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the conference on Spirit, Commerce, and Sustainability. I'm sorry that I'm unable to be with you in Missoula, but I have a number of congressional obligations this busy fall term. As many of you know, I've made Montana's economic status my #1 priority. In June this year, with the able help of many Montanans, I hosted a successful economic development summit attended by nearly 1,000. I have appointed the follow-up task force, and they have begun to address the action plans developed at the summit. You are, of course, invited to be a part of this important work. Some common visions that emerge from the summit activities will not surprise most of you at this conference. Montanans seek a vibrant economy, but not at the cost of losing things that are precious to us here, like livable communities, our uncommonly rich natural heritage, a well-respected workforce, and a socially responsible economic growth. I am committed to helping build Montana's future on these strengths and others that you might share with me from this conference. As your senator, it is my role to make sure you have the resources to follow up on consensus-driven visions for this state. Please keep in touch with me and my staff with the results of your dialogue here in the next few days. There are many other efforts I'm working on in Washington that could help vitalize our communities and fuel a sustainable economy. This year, I secured planning funds for a Center for Rural Livability proposed by the University of Montana. Our first project will involve helping the Lola Community Council with the environmental concerns associated with developing the Travelers Rest historic site, which is projected to be heavily visited during the bicentennial celebration of Lewis and Clark exploration. And then the good senator goes on to talk about some of the bills he's worked on, but if any of you want to know those, I'll let you come and ask me. I just am trying to shorten this because I want to get Paul up here on the stage, so I'd be happy to share the rest of this letter with you. I wish you the best for your conference. My door is always open in D.C. If you're in town, stop by for my morning breakfasts every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Everyone is welcome. Take care, and thanks a lot, Max Barkas. And before I introduce Paul Hawken, I have some housekeeping details that I'm going to let Alex read so you don't get too tired of hearing the same voice.
Hi, it's great to see everyone here. Just briefly, the room schedule for all the breakout sessions is in your program. It looks like this, and there are a couple additions on the back, so if you're wondering where to go tomorrow, that's where it is. It's real easy. This room is divided into four. It'll be A, B, C, and D, and then there's one room across the atrium called Hook Audio, so that's where you want to go tomorrow. Restrooms are located on the other side of the atrium, past the red awning down the hallway. That's always important. The bar is also located down there, the Montana Lounge. Don't forget to visit the beautiful table displays around the atrium. We've got some great groups with some really beautiful displays. And between 8 and 9 tomorrow morning, there'll be coffee and goodies out before our plenary session with Reverend Nancy Wright and Nick Palmer. Lastly, if you've got any questions or any needs about the conference, look for the folks with the blue ribbons on their name tags. They're the conference steering committee, and they can direct your. Thanks very much.
And before I introduce Paul, I would like to say thank you to the people that worked really hard to put this conference together. This was the inspiration of the Caring for Creation Network, and I want these following folks to stand up so you can see who they are. Alex Gorman, Jim Parker, Mike Custodia, Claudia and Gary Brown, Sister Kathleen O'Sullivan, Bob Ballou, Chuck Sperry, Sue Anderson, Jean Duncan, Ron Mueller, Alyssa Cowley, Kelly Daffler, and Vicki Bolick. These folks met almost every week, and actually there was a little bit of a hiatus in the summer where we met only once a month, but almost every week for a year, and they brainstormed who of the genius spirits we would bring to this conference and put an incredible amount of time into it. So I want to give them a round of applause. I would also like to thank the Weave staff, Carol Bellin and Gail Gucci, amongst our many interns and volunteers. This is probably the first Weave event I've ever done where I've actually haven't sort of felt physically sick the day before because they did such an incredible job working on it, and it's really been a joy to work with them, and I thank them for their efforts. We're delighted to have Paul Hawken as our keynote address and speaker tonight. We all make friends in familiar places, coffee shops, at local barbecues, on a river trip or a hike, or at work. Friends who touch our lives in ways, in one way or another. But for me, and I'm sure for many of you, there are other friends who often have an even more profound impact on our lives even if we've never even shared a cup of coffee with them or ever met them. And sometimes we don't even know what they look like. And I call them friends because they provide us with wisdom and guidance for the directions that we take in our lives. They are the authors of the delicious books that we read, the civic leaders or activists of various social movements whose actions have somehow touched our lives so deeply. I have many such friends, and I feel very fortunate. Helen Caldecott, Lois Gibbs, Mark Dowie, and the list goes on. I've been fortunate enough to meet some of them, and through my work, actually develop in-depth, personal, long-term relationships with them. Tonight I have the honor of introducing another of my invisible friends, Paul Hawken. I don't know Paul Hawken. We met very briefly a long time ago, but his work has had a profound impact on mine and that of many other people in this room and around the world. His work has provided me with a profound sense of hope, something that is very rare in this world, especially my world as an environmental activist, that I view in a world that I view as socially and environmentally wounded. Paul has been described as a hard-nosed businessman with a radical vision, but I've been talking to some of his friends who do know him lately, and I get a completely different picture of a warm, very delicate person with very, I don't want to get too gushy here, Paul. But Paul's also an elusive person, and I think we ought to be very grateful that he's here tonight because he's trying to work, as many of us do, to protect his own personal life and have some freedom and some time for himself and his family and to recoup his spirit. He's an educator, a lecturer, an entrepreneur, a journalist, a best-selling author, and an environmentalist. He is known around the world as one of the leading architects and proponents of corporate reform with respect to ecological problems. His writings and works have caused CEOs to transform their internal corporate culture and business philosophy towards environmental restoration. And I want to tell you a story about that was shared with me the other night. Ray Anderson is the CEO of Interface Carpets, which is one of the leading industrial carpet manufacturers in the world. It manufactures carpet, indoor commercial carpet and tile. And Ray was, as he was described to me, is a quintessential capitalist. Drove the Bentley, absolutely loaded, lots of money, exactly how you would imagine a corporate CEO. And apparently, as the story was told, is that Ray talked to one of his vice presidents on a Friday and said, well, I have to address the environmental and health and safety officers of my company, which he didn't even really know he had, and said, I have no idea what to say to them. And his vice president said, here, read this book, and handed over The Ecology of Commerce to him, which had been given to her by her daughter. And Ray took it home and read it over the weekend. And not only had an epiphany, as he describes it, he had a spear through the heart. And went in and met with his managers, his environmental and health and safety managers on Monday morning, and said, we are going to build a different kind of company. We are going to climb the sustainability ladder, and when we get there, we are never going to use another drop of oil. And he has lived that dream to this day and continues to live it. And he attributes it to Paul Hawken. Paul has started many businesses. Smith & Hawken, most of you know the elegant garden furniture catalog. Data Fusion, a knowledge synthesis software company. Several of the first natural food companies in the US that rely solely on agricultural methods. He's written numerous papers and books. The Next Economy, Growing a Business, which was probably his earliest, most famous one, which is shown on television in 115 countries around the world. And most of you know The Ecology of Commerce. Natural Capitalism, Creating the Next Industrial Revolution, which he wrote with Amory and Hunter Levins, was his latest book that came out in 1999. He's given so many keynote addresses and talked to so many events that I would be here all night if I listed them all. But he's talked to a whole range of folks, from major corporations like AT&T, General Foods, Citicorp, Weyerhaeuser, and all the way to the King of Sweden Environmental Seminar. He's had numerous awards and honorary doctorates. The list is almost as long. In 1990, Paul was elected Entrepreneur of the Year by the Small Business Administration. In 1995, the Utne included Paul in its list of 100 visionaries who could change our lives. Inc. magazine's Dream Team, 12 Best Entrepreneurs of the 1980s, along with Ross Perot. David Brower says Natural Capitalism is the most important book of the century, a handbook of solutions and restorations that will have CEOs and ecologists cheering together. And I've actually got a few more quotes, but I'm not going to go through them all because Paul did ask me to keep it short. But I do want to tell you why we asked Paul to come tonight, because the Caring for Creation Network is a group of folks here in Missoula who are gathering to explore their spiritual connections to the earth and to the environment, and to create more activism within their faith-based organizations. And they too stumbled upon Ecology of Karmas. I think it was actually Gary Brown who first read it in the group, and got the whole group to read it. And they were so excited after reading this book. In fact, I think Gary kept saying to me for weeks afterwards, "We gotta get him here, we gotta get him here." And Paul has just been an inspiration to so many of the people within that circle, and I know to so many of you in the room. So please, let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, I think. Best to just let it go at that. You know? And thank you for coming. I should tell you that I have been away for 6 months and quite quiet, actually, and not talking. And I can hear my own voice not being very full. So I don't apologize for that, but I offer that to you as what you're hearing. Since there is no priest or rabbi here giving an invocation, I thought I'd read you a prayer, and I want you to think if you know what it is, actually. I'll just read it to you. It says, "O birther, mother, father of the cosmos, you create all that moves in light." It's too big for that. "O thou, the breathing life of all, creator of the shimmering sound that touches us, respiration of all worlds, we hear you breathing in and out in silence, source of sound, in the roar and the whisper, in the breeze and the whirlwind, we hear your name. Radiant one, you shine within us, outside us, even darkness shines when we remember. Name of names, our small identity unravels in you, you give it back as a lesson. Wordless action, silent potency, where ears and eyes awaken, there heaven comes, O birther, mother, father of the cosmos." I'm reading you this prayer for two reasons. One is beautiful. Second, as a lapsed Catholic, I used to read this prayer all the time. It's called the Lord's Prayer. But this is the Aramaic translation. And the reason I wanted to read it is because I've been thinking a lot about language. And I'm sure those who didn't know, very few of you recognize it as the Lord's Prayer. And the reason you didn't, because Aramaic and Greek are entirely different languages. And Greek, with all due respect, as the precursor of English, is a dreadful language. Explicit, cold, hard, unimaginative. And Aramaic is a poetic and metaphorical language, open to this interpretive translation and others as well. And I think this is important to me, and I want to bring it up because I think that language touches on so much of what we are talking about during this conference. And I want to read something else to you, which is from the March 9th issue of Nature. It was an article on extinction, recovery, and biodiversity. And it said this, it takes the Earth 10 million years to recover from an extinction of species, far longer than previously thought. It takes the environment just as long to recover from the extinction from even a few species, small events, which nevertheless rip holes in the biosphere that are impossible ever fully to repair. when you lose a species, it's not ever coming back. You can't recreate an animal. Extinction is final. Thank you. It goes on to say, we were looking for a point when entire ecosystems recover, and the baseline is an average of 10 million years. The article cites a study done by Weil and Kirchner at the University of California, Berkeley, that predicts that up to half of all species will vanish over the next 50 to 100 years. The study results underline that human beings would be extinct long before any of the species returned. Quote, if we deplete the planet's biological diversity, we will not only leave a biologically impoverished planet, not only for our children or our children's children, but for all children of our species that there ever will be. So that's a different type of language, a scientific language, if you will. And last Monday, this is Friday, so Monday and Tuesday, I had the honor and the opportunity to attend a conference at the California Academy of Science. And it was put on by the Long Now Foundation. Some of you may know of the book, The Clock of the Long Now, which is written by Stuart Brand. And it's about his attempt, and success as it is, to create a clock that goes continuously without maintenance for 10,000 years and rings every millennium. And as I say, every 1,000 years it strikes. And on New Year's Eve on Y2K, we all watched it strike two. It struck once, and then it struck a second time, and that's it for the next 1,000 years. So what Stuart's trying to explore is this dimensionality of the long now, of time itself. And one of the projects that has emerged from that is what's called the All Species Project. The All Species Project, also created by Kevin Kelly, former editor of Wired and Whole Earth Review, is a project to catalog over the next 25 years the remaining 95 to 98% of the species that we have not identified on Earth. We have a range of between 10 and 100 million species, an order of magnitude, which are not identified. And I had the opportunity to spend a couple days with some of the finest scientists, Gillian Prance, Roberto Gamez from Costa Rica, Jorge Sobron from Mexico, Terry Irwin, and 30 others. And I couldn't help but think in some ways that what we were doing in an odd way is revisiting the ark. Because in a sense, 2 by 2, what they were trying to create is the capacity to identify the remaining species on Earth, and for very good reason, for precisely the reason that Weil and Kirchner referred to, which is if we don't do it in the next 25 years, we may miss half, may miss less than that, but we will never see or know them again. Okay? And as extraordinary as that is, I couldn't help but also note the explicitness of the language, this Linnaean, Latin, binomial sense that somehow, if we can just name them, that something wonderful will happen. Well, maybe. It certainly will be different. But I was thinking there, doodling, as I often do during meetings, do drawings. I was drawing a turtle. And of Wade Davis's story in Baffin Island of an Inuit elder who was the last holdout when the Canadians wanted to take over this large piece of Inuit land for oil exploration. They got them new land. But he was a holdout. He wouldn't sell. He wouldn't move. And one night in the middle of winter, he got so furious that he walked right outside. He was being pressured by his own in-laws, his own relatives. And he had 2 dogs, and he had what he was wearing, which is not much more than I'm wearing right now. And they watched him do this. He shit in his hands. It was so cold, it froze immediately, and before it froze, he shaped it into a knife. He took that knife, he killed one of his dogs. He slit it open. With the bones and the skin, he made a sleigh. With the other dog, he sledded right off into the winter. And he was never seen until the next summer. Now, this is the heart of the Arctic. It's a winter. He had nothing with him. And he came back as healthy as could be, over 60 years old. So did he know the names or did he know where he was? He knew where he was. He knew exactly this place. And I'm reminded of the Selknam people, also called the Yamana. There's 3 or 4 tribes, Tierra del Fuego, that Magellan saw when he came across 3, 4, I forget, but and he described them as beasts, as bestial people, dressed in furs, bathing by the ocean near their canoes, steam coming off them in the winter, right, from the salt water, that they had to break the ice. Right? And in the late 19th century, there was a missionary who went there, and we assume he was assigned to this estancia because it had problems everywhere else. Why would you assign an Anglican to an estancia in the middle of nowhere in Patagonia? But we assume that was why. But nevertheless, he was an amateur lexicographer, and there was only 40 left of this tribe. They had been hunted. They had been bountied at $25 a head, right, by the Czechs, by the Scots, by the Germans, to open up the South for sheep for the Industrial Revolution. So 40 deracinated people, tribespeople left around this parish because they had no land, so this is where food was. And he began to make a dictionary, and he got to 32,000 words, and he died. He was working with one man. He wasn't really, they had no chiefs, but it was like a shaman, like an elder. And they wouldn't discuss with him the higher language. Women, cosmology, spirituality, nothing. Because his father had been involved with the massacre, and they probably wouldn't discuss it with him anyway. Now, just to give you some sense, Japanese has 40,000 words. So here's 32,000 words from these beasts, right? And this dictionary is in the British Museum, and what's so astonishing about it, has more verbs than English. And there's a poetic and metaphorical language. The word for depression is a crab sloughing off its shell and waiting for a new one. Okay. Ika means to tie your canoe to a reef while you're waiting for the seals to come to hunt. Right? Extraordinary language, but when you read this dictionary, it is science. It's not just poetry, it's not just verbs that are metaphorical, it is science. It's the science of place. It's extraordinary observational science. We've lost 500 of these languages in the Americas, right, since the conquistadors. So this is a very, very different kind of language, and it's a language in which science and religion, there is no distinction. They're the same thing. So when we come to the subject of spirituality, commerce, and sustainability, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with 3 very, very different languages, right, that hardly meet. Last week I was in New Mexico, and there's a place where it's in the San Juans, in the Carson National Forest, and there's a refuge there. And the refuge is the furthest place away from any roads that hunters use. And the animals that use it the most are wild horses. And you go in, it's not even a valley, it's like a bowl, 2 beaver dams, and it's cropped. The grass is cropped as if there was a landscape gardener there. And under every tree, you can see it's also cropped, and it looks like it's been made into a parkland by the animals, by the horses. And so I've gone there back and forth, and I've seen the bays and sorrels, but I had this wild idea that on the full moon, I would go see horses there. And so I took 3 people in the darkness, and we sat there, and we waited in the east for the moon to come up. I said, wait here, and I'll go into the dense thickets of spruce, right, and flush out the horses. And as I did so in the dark, something began to track me, and I thought, this is really stupid. And not only more so than I realized horses never sleep in valleys at night, they always go up, so I thought, there's no horses here. And I went around and crossed the beaver pond, I went around, and then in these very dense Engelmann spruce thickets, I started to shine my light. And it was just the most funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. There was eyes everywhere. Red eyes, yellow eyes, wide eyes, bear, narrow eyes, wild goat. I'd never seen wild goat eyes, mildew. I mean, it was just, I started to laugh. Because we had sat there for 2 hours, it was stone silent. I thought there's not a creature here. And I realized, in a sense, it's a refuge. They have come. It's one of the last wild places of this forest. And I remembered the words of Wilde and Kirchner. So here we have, in a sense, these different languages, and they have a language which we don't speak, and we're trying to somehow create a world that will what? That will endure, that will sustain, that we can pass on to our children, not as a joke, but as a gift. Right? That's what we're here for. That's what we do. Let me tell you what I think corporations are, and with all due respect, corporations are very different than the earth, sustainability, or spirit because we made them. And those two things weren't made by us. Corporations are entirely an artifice, a construct. They never were seen before on earth before 500 years ago. They were created by royalty. They were created by kings and queens. They were created by people who wanted to conquer the world and remove liability from those who went out from Europe. So vestigially, that's still true. They don't have they don't have liability. That's what a corporation is. But they are also something which is not so commonly said, and I think it's very important to understand, is corporations are much closer to a belief system than an institution. In fact, they're closer to cults. And I say that both humorously and very accurately, because the hallmarks of cults are, cults try to build the tallest building in town, right? Okay, there's one thing they do. Second, they have dress codes. They have borrowed language. They have these charismatic leaders, dead or alive, doesn't make any difference, right? Usually men, right? And they have sleep deprivation, right? And those of you who work in corporations know what I'm saying is true. It's the last place in America where you don't have the First Amendment. You cannot speak freely at a corporation, or you do so at your peril, right? You can't say what you feel. You can't say what you think. Very, very careful when you're an employee. Right? So corporations also have a paradigm. They have what I call the paradigm, I call it brown world. So it gives it away, but I suppose. But the paradigm is that you can, in a sense, create 5 million compounds, which we have done, 70,000 of which we sell, the others which we created in order to create the 70,000 we sell. And you can emit billions of pounds of toxic material into the soil, air, water, our babies, our mothers, as Theo Corcoran said, and you can do that continuously. And that it's a faith-based operation, because you have faith that those 5 million chemicals that have never been seen on Earth are not going to be problematic, even though we've studied 200 really intensively. Right? And out of that paradigm comes another one, which is we'll have thousands and thousands of laws to protect us from poisoning ourselves from the things that we have faith in, right? And along with that is the idea that we can mine the Carboniferous period, right? Take it, combust it with, on a good day, a thermodynamic efficiency of 1%, usually less than that, and double glaze the planet. And again, we pray and have faith that nothing harmful will happen to us or anybody else, right? So this is entirely, as I say, a paradigm based on faith. They also believe that they're better off with money than time. So people are burning out, but they have money, so they feel it's okay. They have bank accounts, they have charge cards and things like that, but they have no time. Right? I asked once 200 CEOs, COOs, CIOs, CTOs, and other O's at a conference board. I asked them this. I said, would you please raise your hand if you know anybody or if you yourself are spending too much time with your children? Raise your hand. So it has I could go on and on. It's about this paradigm. I think you know it. It also has faith that you can, as Paul Ehrlich has said, keep popping the rivets on the wings of the airplane and it's going to fly. To which you can keep eliminating, as E.O. Wilson said, at an extraordinary rate, biodiversity on Earth, and that it's going to be okay. Okay. So this is corporations. Very interesting They are the dominant institution in the world by far, no question about it. And as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, our best thinking got us here. And in some ways, they often think this is their best thinking. Now, Kundera has said that the struggle of humanity against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And one of the things you see, if you notice, maybe watching the Olympics, or maybe you watch TV, but one thing you will notice is that the advertisements are really not about memory, but they're about forgetting. They're creating a world in which you're in amnesia, in which you compare yourself, and you think that's actually the world. So it's an amnesic world. It's not a world of memory. Right? So this is the struggle of power. What happens, though, of course, is that some of us do remember. We do think. We feel, and out of that comes these other words, spirit and sustainability. And spirit, of course, I'm not the person to really define spirituality, but we know this: if the corporate paradigm is material, spirit is the opposite. It says there's a reality, in fact, the reality, that is not material at all. And it says that, in a sense, it is an uncreated, it is a pervasive reality, and it's a reality beyond human knowledge. And this reality is approached and known and understood through grace, through devotion, through humility, through surrender, through prayer, through meditation, through teachers. Right? It's a reality that's understood by observing one's thoughts. It's a reality that's understood by understanding the nature of desire, of attachment, of cravings. It's a reality that's understood, right, by simplicity. And it's not a reality that lends itself well to any language, because it's not a reality that's known through language. Ever. And then there's sustainability. What's that? Well, I actually think you should have started with Alan Atkinson, because I think, has some of the best definitions of it. Anyway, he sings and I don't. But sustainability is the language of kinship. Okay? Above all, it's about seeing. It's about seeing. It's not about saying, it's about seeing. It's not about identifying, but it's about how we see the world. Fundamentally, those who understand, practice, implement, and work towards sustainability, the difference between them and others is simply they see a different world. And they see the world as a system, as opposed to as components, as instead of atomistically. Now, Ben Zander, who's a conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, has defined leadership as the capacity to listen to all the voices, number one. Number two, having listened to all the voices, to create new distinctions and categories. And from those new distinctions and categories, to create new possibilities for humankind, or those whom you are asked to lead. And one of Alan's definitions of sustainability is creating new possibilities. And to me, sustainability is absolutely not about no, it's about yes, it's about creating new possibilities for humankind. And it started out as saying no for a very good reason, because of the degradation, the assault on living systems, on habitat, on water, on air, on our lands, on our mountains, on our forests, on our creatures. And that's how it started. But it has to go to yes. Not yes, you may destroy, but yes, there are entirely and extraordinarily different possibilities available to us. What sustainability is not about is fixing this world. And the reason it's not about fixing it is because, as Václav Havel has also said, is that this world is ending because it's invalid. It has no validity. You don't fix something that's invalid. And whatever the assumptions that informed it are, they simply don't relate anymore. They're simply not true, if they ever were. And this invalidity, if you will, is creating this extraordinary and long period of discontinuity in which we all live, in which we all suffer, in which we pray, in which we work, in which we are confused, in which we feel fear, in which we feel anger. And out of this, there are no leaders, because for many of us here, we saw our leaders shot on television. You know, we saw them dead. We saw them, Martin, Robert, John, right? So it's almost like a conspiracy said we don't want leaders because we don't want to see that again. So it's a movement remarkably free in some ways of cant in leadership because of this extraordinary trauma that happened to a generation. Extraordinary trauma. But this discontinuity is still about systems, and you can't see it unless you think like a system. Aldo Leopold, his famous dictum, "Think like a mountain," was saying, think of the mountain as a system, right? Otherwise you cannot understand what to do. Right? Even if you don't have the science, you must think of it as a system. And luckily, it is our birthright. We're hardwired to think that way. And if you think about this for a minute, when we were children, there's a child here, Dana's 6-week-old son, Alexander, you hear burbling in the background, all right? Now, what does he hear? What he hears is a stream of sound. And before 9, 10, 11, 12 months, what's going to happen to Alexander? Alexander is going to start to say words that have meaning to him. How in the heck did he do that when if you listen to me talking, there's no break at all in the sound of my words? I do not speak like a printed page. Right? So what this child has to do, what we all did, is out of this modulating, sing-song sound, looking at expression, hearing intonation, seeing the results of what was said, to start to divine and derive meaning and start to assemble a language, a vocabulary, right? This is systems thinking. We are extraordinary systems thinkers. We take to it like seals to water, and yet, when it comes to the environment, we seem to forfeit. We seem to put it, we say, no, we'll look at it in components. And even if we look at a forest, we'll look at it in components, right? Allowable cut, right? What does that say? Nothing, right? So we are systems thinker, and this system we're in started 250, 300 years ago, and it started in Europe. It started by people who did two things. One is they discovered this vast world of natural capital, the conquistadors, the explorers, and they discovered from countries that had cut their forests, right? Destroyed much of their commons, and there it was, this unbelievable amount of natural capital. At the same time, the limiting factor to human development in the industrial age or the pre-industrial age was what? Roads, highways, hospitals, schools, clothing, food, farms, houses. It was human-made capital. We desperately needed it. We have made it desperately. We have made so much of it. We have spent 250 years making human-made capital. How do we do that? How? By transforming our natural capital, but how else did we do it? Why was it called a revolution? It was called a revolution because at the very core of this paradigm is to make each human being more productive, to make and allow each person to do more and more work. And we are in that paradigm to this day. And if you're not at work, send me a job application. Every company is, every institution is, your PDAs, your laptops, your cell phones, everything. What's it about? It's about doing more, right? And more, and more, and more. So the 250 years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is about making human beings more productive, because when a human being makes more, the cost of goods go down. When the cost of goods go down, you can buy more. When you buy more, real income goes up. You demand more. Production increases. As production increases, productivity increases, innovation, income goes up. It's why it was called a revolution. It was self-actuating. Right? And it's still revolving, right? But what does it do? What does it do? How do you make a human being more productive? How do you make them more productive? By using more and more natural capital. So we are in a world that's so extraordinary. It's upside down and backwards. We're using more and more of what we have less of, natural capital, our environment, ecosystem services, to To do what? Use less and less of what we have more of, and that's human beings, the most successful species on Earth, right? At least primate species. 6 billion of us, 1 billion can't work who want to, 2 billion come into the workforce in the next 20 years, and every technology you see, read about that's getting VC money is about how to use less human beings. The internet is about how to use less human beings. Shop at home, for goodness sakes, right? Get rid of the middleman, fine. Get rid of downtown, fine. Then what? So this is an extraordinary thing. You know, what's extraordinary about it is that it's upside down and backwards. What do we have more of? People. What do we have less of? Natural capital. So in a sense, this discontinuity is a movement from one paradigm, brown world, to green world, if you will, in which it is reversed. And what we need to do is create an economic system in which it is our natural capital which we make exponentially more productive by using more and more human beings so that every human being, every woman and man has decent living wage jobs. Right? But there are actually more jobs than people, something that if you go to the University of Chicago, they will tell you under neoclassical economic theory is impossible. Right? But we're the only species without full employment. Think about it. It's not impossible. It's just that we can't imagine those possibilities. Right? So what we've done is we haven't just poisoned the well, we just haven't poisoned the air, we've poisoned our imagination as to what is possible. So this discontinuity, this crab sloughing off its shell, awaiting for the new one, this depression, if you will, is about the seeds of imagination. It doesn't come willy-nilly. You have to slough off the old shell. We are sloughing it off. We have to ask ourselves, how do we create an economic system that tells us it's cheaper to destroy the earth in real time? What an amazing thing. And if you don't agree with that, you can't get your advanced degrees at universities. So we teach our people this, right? We teach our people this. What an extraordinary thing. A pricing system that discounts the future and sells off the present at a discount. Brilliant. We call this a capitalist system? No way. No way. Because in a true capitalist system, you put the capital on the balance sheet, and you don't mistake capital for income. If you do that in business, it's called fraud. You're taken to jail. If you do it in the country, it's called GDP, and you run for president, you get elected. Right? It's fraud either way. A completely fraudulent economic system with no minus signs, so we have no idea what it all adds up, what it all means, because the calculator simply doesn't work, you know. But, as the Weil and Kirshner paper pointed out, why is this change coming about now? It's coming about because of the loss of living systems. All living systems on Earth are in decline. Period. End of statement. Every living system on Earth is in decline, and the rate of decline is speeding up. It's an extraordinary thing, you know. I mean, can you imagine, you know, telling your children that? By the way, I meant to tell you, right? Since 50, a third of all forests have been lost without replanting. Since 1950, a fourth of all topsoil. This was the data at 1992 at the Earth Summit. So we've had 8 years, you know. Fifth of all arable land, lost since 1950. A fourth of all bird species in the last century. 2/3 of all fisheries, completely fished, overfished, or have crashed. We have raised in 150 years carbon levels to the highest level in 20 million years. We usurp and divert 55% of all freshwater flows. Freshwater ecosystems are disappearing at the rate of 6% a year. Half were lost in the last 30 years. We have used 1/3 of all the world's natural capital since 1970. We're good. Cornell did this really interesting study, which I found fascinating, and it said that the people who do things badly are supremely confident of their abilities. I thought that was actually I thought that was instructive. It helps me. So the question is this. A good question, well. because you cried, you know. Because how do you do the following at the same time? And this is our problem set as a civilization, as a culture. And I could add to it, but like provide more material well-being, and we've said we're using it too much matter, right? We've got to provide more material well-being for the people who desperately need it, which is about 70-80% of the world, not us. Right? We have to provide a sense of expanding possibilities and horizons for people who are already well off, or they won't buy into it, and they control everything. We have to drastically reduce our ecological footprint overall here and all places in the world. We have to create more, as I said earlier, living wage jobs and people who want them, without government workfare, welfare, subsidies, or inflation. Right? And we have to increase real income. Pretty cool problem. The interesting thing about it is you can't do one of them. You have to do them all. And that's what natural capitalism is about. And I'm not going to go into it too much, but because I wrote it already. But let me talk to you about possibilities, because remember I said sustainability is about, yes, it's about possibilities. Okay? So here are some of the possibilities, which we do mention. But this is what is happening. Information doubled every 7 years in the 1990s. And in 2000, information is doubling every 3 to 4 years. By 2020, it will double every 30 days. Pretty interesting. Now, this is overwhelming for some of us and a bummer. But at the same time, and you think about it, like Nike is deluged with emails because of that ridiculous and horrendous ad they ran during the opening ceremony of the Olympics. I mean, they are coping. It wouldn't have happened without email. So there is something going on in terms of, do you know the ad I'm talking about? You don't want to know about it. It was our American 1,500-meter runner, Lindsay Robinson, I think. I might have blown the name, but she's in a cabin, very much like in Missoula, in the forest, and she's run in, and she's taking off her sweatshirt in front of a mirror, and then and she's got her jogging bra on and shorts and shoes, and behind her comes this sort of Freddy Krueger, you know, Friday the 13th character with a chainsaw and a mask, and he lunges right for her and misses her and cuts the mirror in half, and she screams in horror. She runs out of the cabin. This guy chases her, and going through the forest, and finally, she outruns him. Right? He's exhausted, and then the thing is something like, "What is sport?" And you know, somebody can save your life or make you live longer, something like that. And of course, it scared the bewillikers out of children. It violated every woman who saw it. You know, as my friend Bonnie Raitt, Marion Williamson, and Gloria Steinem are reading this thing. But as I said, we wouldn't show a lynching and say, you know, a black African American running from a lynching and saying, you know, get to buy our shoes. I mean, you know. But anyway, the point is that information is doubling, and it has two effects. One is that more people know more sooner and quicker, and the feedback loops are closing. And the other part of this is that 80% of all things that exist right now didn't 10 years ago. So there's also a compression of this loop of what is, what exists. Of course, Oreos still exist, and Cheez Whiz and Spam, but the fact is that 80% is new. It just wasn't here 10 years ago. And what that tells me is that we now have the ability to change more quickly than we ever had before. And I think that's the good news. There are some downsides from all this. Let me give you some of the possibilities that are in my life. And I just share them because I'm experiencing it. One of them is in the Sea of Cortez in Baja, Gulf of California. And there's a big shrimp industry. Many of the shrimp you eat, if you eat shrimp, which I won't, come from Baja. There's 1,200 boats there. 40% lose money, 30% break even, 30% actually make a profit. And of course, what do the 40% or the 30% who break even or lose money do, which is they fish even more avidly, the same fisheries that are being overfished. The nets are dragged over the beds there 3 times a year. Every single shrimp bed is dragged 3 times a year. Of course, it totally disturbs the sea bottom. And more importantly, for every pound of shrimp that's caught in the Gulf, there's 10 pounds of bycatch. The landed value of the shrimp is 200 million. The value of the bycatch, which is destroyed and killed, is 500 million. So that is to say, for every $200 million of shrimp every year, $500 million of corvina and other fish are destroyed and killed. So this is the shrimp industry in Mexico. All right. Now, what's the possibility? The possibility is that a friend who's rather well off, unlike most of us, me, but he was very well off, and I convinced him to do something, which is to do something that was done once in American industry and worked, and that is he's posting a multi-million-dollar prize through a nonprofit foundation. And the prize is to anybody who can create a different method of shrimping that causes zero bycatch and zero disturbance to the seabed. And it's many millions of dollars. It's a big deal. And it's not announced yet, okay, but it will be. And working with Conservation International and WWF and groups in Mexico to announce this and so forth. But here's the catch. What's interesting, no pun intended, and there are some incipient technologies that can do this, but they haven't been developed, right? Is that when this is, and somebody will win it, somebody will win the money. People are genius when they have the right incentives. And they will win it, and when the technology is created, it will be licensed all over the world because it's cheaper. No shrimper really wants to catch 10 pounds of bycatch for every pound of shrimp. It costs them money. The licensing fees will go back to the foundation. The inventor gets the money, and some of the licensing fees, those fees go back into creating more prizes for more problems. Okay? So in other words, restoration or solutions feed solutions. And we're in a world where problems create problems, create problems, create problems, right? Second order, third order, fourth order effects. Right? Another example of this, and it's not been done, but let me give you just the thinking, because I proposed this in Ecology of Commerce, and that is that I was thinking about utilities, because I know they're much maligned, but there's actually some curious things about utilities, not the least of which is they have a monopoly, or they used to. And I was thinking about what if, because I was looking at the commons, and the fact is that the commons are either being destroyed or corporatized, and there's very little in between. And what if we had a salmon utility? A salmon utility would be like this. That is, from British Columbia all the way down to California, if you landed, caught a salmon, or ranched it, doesn't make any difference, you pay a tax at the dock or at the place of a sale. 50 cents a fish, I don't know. Okay, but it's money. All right, it's real money. Excuse me, BC, Alaska as well. Okay, and this goes to the salmon utility. Well, what does the salmon utility do? Well, it tries to create more salmon, but wild salmon, not farm salmon. So it has to do what? Habitat restoration, education, has to dismantle dams. It has to work at creating the habitat and the conditions, as Janine Benyus says so eloquently, that are conducive to life. Otherwise, no salmon. That means educating fishermen. It means educating everybody. It means stop using shampoo in watersheds that are close to riparian corridors. I mean, it means a lot of things. But if they have this flow of funds, what can they do? Like a utility, they can even borrow money. They have a flow of funds, uneven as it may be, so they can invest. When there is more salmon, what happens? They get more money. What do they have to do with the money? They have to spend it. They're a monopoly. They can only make 8 or 9 or 10% profit per year. After that, they can't keep it, so they have to spend the money on what? Restoration. Okay? So is it water conservation they spend it on so they can dismantle more dams? There's all sorts of possibilities. But the point is you create an economic system that starts to feed itself towards restoration as opposed to degradation, as opposed to the tragedy of the commons. In Chattanooga, Bill McDonough and I worked on a project where they had been mandated by the EPA to build a secondary wastewater treatment for the water that was coming off the parking lots and road surfaces, because it was carrying hydrocarbons and other things into the Tennessee River. It was above allowable limits, and under the Clean Water Act, and they had to build this turnkey 80, now $100 million, but dollar plant. It was Bechtel or fluor. It was going to cost $5 million a year in electricity just to run it. They had to dig up all the streets, put in PVC pipe, and basically it was going to raise taxes for everybody. And they came to us and they said, what would you do? And we don't know. So we thought about it, and we came up with a proposal that was the following. We went and talked to companies that were there and asked them if they would invest in a different technology if it was cheaper over the lifetime than paying taxes. And they said yes. They said, what would that technology be? And what we suggested is that every parking lot and median strip in the city of Chattanooga, both private and public, be basically redone to permeable paving, which is used extensively in Europe and barely here, which is 13, 15-inch hexagonal concrete pavers that are hollow that sell in a bed of tile, gravel under which there's of course soil, and you can plant sedge and other very tough grasses in it. And that you take the parking lots that are sloped this way and you slope them in, so the water stays there, it recharges groundwater. And in the parking lots, since that's one of the most botanically active areas in the United States, that is, say, Chattanooga, what we're going to do is make the parking lots parks. We're going to make a botanical garden, plant water-loving trees, and name them, that is to say, botanically, like you see in a botanical garden, and then have a $10 million bond issue, which we would float, the income of which we would use to hire youth for the summer jobs of maintaining the parking lots, which are really summer parks. And so that the cars were parking under trees, under the green, cool during the day instead of being radiating heat both in and out. And the fact of the matter is, when we did the calculations, it was a classic public works project, which is all the money stayed in Chattanooga, and it went to companies that refurbished and basically redid the parking lots. And one of the guys we worked with was at the Supercomputer Center at the University of Minnesota, and his name was Jason Green, and we were working when I said, he kept saying, Green, Green, and Jason was a little odd. We thought he was saying his last name. But what he was talking about was, in fact, he was looking at what the effect would have in terms of the ambient temperature in downtown Chattanooga. And the fact is, it would lower it considerably. And on the back of the napkin was better than a napkin, but we roughly calculated they would save $45 million a year in utility costs for cooling. So instead of $5 million a year going out to run this plant, it was $5 million a year saved. At the same time, youth then learned the local flora, right? And disadvantaged youth became trained and had job skills, and the money turned inside the city. So what we did is take what we know about water, which is it's a loop, it's a cycle, it's a hydrologic system, and try to design a system that respected that. Now, interestingly, Chattanooga has never done that. What was interesting about it for me is that years later, somebody came up to me from Canada and said, boy, that sure was a great idea. We did it, here it is. And they showed me the town, the plans and everything, and I was like, oh my God. And they did it, and they're still doing it. They're retrofitting the whole city, right? These are possibilities. The possibilities aren't so important in their specifics. What is important is that they allow us to reimagine what is possible. And that, to me, is what sustainability is about. Now, our book, Natural Capitalism, is a long, albeit sometimes tedious, but nevertheless, solution statement. Because have you read enough problem statements yet? I wrote one of them myself. When I wrote the College of Commerce, I sent to a friend in Alabama, and she called back and said, Paul, he said, I don't know. But I do think you should read the first 4 chapters in The Sunshine. So So natural capitalism is a solution statement based not on speculation, but based on observation. That is based on what is happening right now. And our motto in writing the book, if it's happened, it's possible. So therefore, what we talked about is what has happened. What is happening, therefore, it must be possible, because someone has already done it. And we cut back from 170,000 words to 120, and in the process left out many examples, which is to the benefit of the reader. And we cut our citations down to under 1,000. We had 1,500, and the publisher said, if you have over 1,000 citations, it is a college. It's an academic book. It is not a trade book. We publish trade books. Our readers will not stand for more than 1,000 citations. So I think there's areas in the book that are uncited, actually, and almost like plagiarism, but we can't be fully blamed. But in that book, what we talk about is that the fact is that this industrial system, this brown world, what's so wonderful about it, what's so exciting about it, it's so miserably designed. It is so wasteful. It's so execrable. It's so stupid. I can't even tell you. When you start to break it down, analyze it, you don't know whether to jump for joy or cry. Because, you look at a car, 1% efficient. You look at these lights, 2.5% efficient, these lights. I mean, this is ridiculous. The whole system, thermodynamically speaking, according to Bob Ayers, is maybe 2% on a good day, and that assumes that when you get in your car in LA and drive 7 miles to the 7-Eleven to buy a pint of Ben & Jerry's Chubby Hubby that's been shipped 2,500 miles across in a refrigerated truck in the middle of summer, that is a valuable act, okay? But if you start to look at really use value, was that a really useful thing for you to do? Probably not. Probably not. Then, or could we make ice cream in Southern California? I think so. Maybe we should just ship the recipe, If you start to look at the use value, the United States is about 0.5% efficient. That's about it. Is driving 45 minutes a day useful? I don't think so. So what I'm saying is that the glory of the system is that it's just ridiculous. And it's a systems axiom, which is that when you maximize or try to, and it's the components, when you try to, in a sense, work only on a component level and optimize components, you pessimize the system. The system gets less and less efficient. The first engine, the Newcomen steam engine, was 0.5% efficient. That's where we are today, folks. It's amazing. We haven't gone very far, but we sure did a lot of damage. So what we're talking about in this book is that literally it is possible for us, and this is extremely important for the developed world, to reduce the metabolism, what we take, what we use, energy, water, cellulose, metals, minerals, right? This material we take from natural capital, from ecosystem. We can reduce that by 90, 95, even 99% over the next 50 years and improve the quality of our life. Now, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds impossible. But if I had stood in front of you in your parliament in 1750 and I said, this cool idea, we're going to increase the productivity of a human being by 50, 100, 200 times in the next 70 years, I would have been taken to the insane asylum. But that's exactly what happened with the average, completely uneducated Lancashire spinner. Right? 200 times more work in 7 years. There was no concept at that time for human productivity. There was no framework. There was no language for it. So what we're trying to do is creating a language for an entirely different relationship between the two most complex systems there are, human and living. Right? And this is full of possibility, of innovation. Janine Benyus, who is a native writer, author who will speak to you, talks about biomimetics, biomimicry. I mean, there's 400 companies right now you probably haven't heard about who are doing extraordinary things in terms of creating materials, not only from, in a sense, natural materials, which is important, but even more importantly, materials that can go right back into nature with no harm, go back as nourishment to nature, and that have extraordinary properties that are far more impressive than the properties or the materials that they are replacing. And she'll speak to that, and the thinking and the creativity. I mean, when you listen to Janine, you want to laugh, you want to smile. It makes you happy. Because you feel like the curtains are opening up for this bleakness that exists in terms of the data. People ask me, are you optimistic, you're pessimistic? I say, well, if you read the data, you're not pessimistic, you're not reading the data. But if you actually spend time with people, you cannot help but be optimistic. This is our work. It's extraordinary work. This is our gift. It's been given to us. Right? This is not a curse. Right? This is our time. This is our life. Wendell Berry talks about, these tasks, these things that have been given us, this opportunity. These things are so small, so humble. They're so humbling. And they're too small to make any of us rich or famous, but to make us extraordinarily fulfilled in our life. And we can say, as Adrian Rich says, I think, to each other, that we honor those people who age after age with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world, which is what we're being asked to do, reconstitute the world. And the most astonishing thing about this movement, if you will, this movement towards sustainability in my mind, is that I think, and I can't prove it to you, but it's the largest movement in the world in terms of the rate of growth. Sustainability in its broadest sense, women's issues, social justice, water, food, right, air, climate, forests, creatures, our children. There's 100,000 NGOs in the world who work on these issues. There's more than 30,000 in the United States. They're marginal. They don't know from year to year whether they'll exist. A lot of them don't even know about each other. Although the internet's changing that. Right? It's an extraordinary thing. And what's so extraordinary about it, if you go back in history and you look at any movement or any discipline or any profession or any paradigm, such as economics or psychology, you find me a period, a time, a country, a place, a world in which spontaneously organizations, institutions arose to deal with specific problems whose underlying core values and frameworks were in absolute coherence and agreement. It's never happened. Didn't happen in religion, that's for sure. Didn't happen in academics, still hasn't. Nothing like this has ever happened. And it doesn't mean the losses are great, won't be great. They are great. The one thing we don't have to do, though, is be afraid, because our worst nightmares have already happened. It's a done deal. So forget the fear. Right? Now we can play. Somebody asked me once, said, Paul, aren't you afraid that your work with corporations will be used to brush up their image, to greenwash them, in a sense, to get them into a mode where they will actually deny the real problem? And I said, no, I'm not afraid of that at all. They said, why not? I said, because they do it all the time. Why be afraid of it? Right? So again, we cannot change this world through fear. Even you think about it, in terms of faith, real faith. When you think of Jews in the worst moments of the pogrom, in Europe in World War II, dragged off to not just death, misery before death. Right? And what did they say? Next year in Jerusalem. You know? That's faith. We have a... And that's the faith that's going to stand for something. You know? It's not about changing the world. It's about being a world, you know, that we want to see. So, as Emily Dickinson said once, you know, life is so startling. You know, there's nothing else to do. I was once in a hotel room in Miami, and I was taking a shower in the morning, and I was looking at the back door of the bathroom, and in rather large letters, kind of disturbing, it said, "If you see anything suspicious or disturbing, please report it immediately to management." I'm standing there naked, you know, going... But as I thought about it, I realized, well, darn, I've been trying to do that my whole life, you know. And there's no management, you know. And we've become, I think, as a populace, so timorous, so mute. You know? And what you see, I think, in people is they are addicted to whatever numbs the pain of not having a spiritual and sustaining vision for themselves and their family in this world, you know. So by standing for that, you don't give a vision, you don't inform somebody, you don't tell them. By standing for a sustaining vision, you change people you don't even know, right? Just like we are harming people now that we don't even know, you can change people you don't even know by exactly who you are, you know. Carolyn Casey, I don't know if you know her, she's like a visionary astrological activist in Washington, D.C., a great friend and wonderful, wonderful woman. But she says we have to stop telling ourselves that good is weak. She says, it's strong. Good is strong. And we have to act as if we have forever to live. This is me now. Because that's what we know. That's what Spirit tells us. We have forever. We're not going anywhere. We may die, but we're still here. Right? We have forever. We have all the time in the world. Nobody can take that away from us. You know? And that sensibility transforms ourselves as it forgives ourselves and others. You know? And it's a world as self is not the world as other. And that difference will make all the difference. Will make all the difference. I don't know if some of you know A.J. Muste. He's a social activist of a prior generation. Extraordinary man. And he was standing in New York City once, as the story goes, doing a vigil, which he did a lot of. And it was night, it was cold, it was raining, and a reporter who knew him was walking home and saw him and said, "You're standing out here, you know, alone in the rain, in the cold, holding a candle, is not going to change the world, AJ." And he said, "No, no," he said, "I don't do this to change the world." He says, "I do this so the world won't change me." I want to end with a two-line poem by Hafiz, which I love. It really forms the basis of my next work, which is called Uprising. It's a last invitation I'll get to speak at a corporation. And the book is about the world-growing and powerful worldwide resistance to the corporatization of the commons. Food, water, air, our bodies, our cultures, and everything. And the heroes are, Bandhan Shiva and Arundhati Roy, and, Jose Bove, and Lord Melcher, of all people. And they're the people who stand up, known and unknown, and whether it's like Jose Bove taking his front loader of sheep shit and trashing a new McDonald's in his local town in France, or people at Clacket Sound or wherever it is who say, no, this is as far as you're going to go. And my body will stand here. The people in Cochabamba, Bolivia, who protested against the privatization of the water by Bechtel. And this is what the book's about. And we're also doing a documentary about it. But this poem by Javi says, the small men who know place the world into their cages. The wise woman who must duck under the moon scatters keys everywhere for the rowdy prisoners. Thank you. This is not an encore band. Be careful what you clap for. But Brian asked if I'd be open for questions, and I'm always open for questions. The only time I really learn speaking is when my mouth is shut. So if there's any questions you'd like to share, or statements too. Yeah? Toronto. It's a suburb of Toronto. I can give you the data. I don't know the name of the suburb. It's not Kingston, but it was a suburb of Toronto. Yeah. The question was, what was the town in Canada? If you didn't know? Yes.
You gave us two takes on the internet from two different angles.
Would you like some more takes?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have my friends like Ted Nelson and Stuart Brand, and I know a lot of people who imagined and envisaged it. Not who actually did it, but whose writings prophetically, called for it. They created the Hackers Conference, and I know a lot of these people and their friends, and I don't know. I see good things and I see really distressing things. The thing that I see good is the loss of authority where it is not merited. Because the internet seems to be a leveler. And I love that part of it. I love the fact that it's very difficult to get away with stuff now in the world. Seattle would have been very different without the internet and cell phones. And the police finally got hit to that, because on the second day they started seizing our cell phones. Illegally, but they actually had the right idea that they were going to stop them. At the same time, what concerns me hugely about the internet and all the ancillary telecom, wireless, etc. technologies are both the physical sides of it, which is enormous pollution, electronic pollution, which we're clueless as to the extent of it, what it means, what it's doing to us. And the other thing is the hyper-acceleration of technology and time itself. And one of the things that when I wrote about Seattle, sort of invoking Stuart's work, one of the things that occurred to me was that, stepping back from Seattle, not that the issues weren't the reason, of course, but in some larger sense, what you saw meeting in Seattle, and you could feel it from the people there, was in a sense slow time is meeting fast time. In a sense, globalization, the WTO, is about accelerating and making, in a sense, a commercial autobahn of the world for transnational corporations. And basically, it's destroying place and people and culture, and so, in a sense, slow time showed up. And fast time looks at slow time, as like anomalous, as Luddite. But art is not Luddite, and culture is not Luddite, and line dancing is not Luddite, and song and tradition are not Luddite, and nature is not Luddite, and place is not Luddite. So there's this demonization of, like, all these kids have purple hair, therefore they know nothing. And yet, what's so interesting about Seattle to me was that the people on the streets had read the draft agenda. Many of the delegates had not. Because of the IFG and other NGOs had spread the draft agenda throughout the internet and had teach-ins, and so the kids, and even old people like me, we actually knew what was in the agenda. And a lot of the protesters was about the draft agenda. And so again, here's where the internet played an extraordinary role, because we would have been clueless, because they would have been in binders, and they would have been given the binders, when they got to the convention center or the hotels, right? And we out there like, sort of retrogressively, and there's enough to protest without the draft agenda, but still, they would have seen us as, in a sense, not being au courant, And in fact, when you saw the dialogues and the conversations on the street between demonstrators and delegates, I think a lot of delegates were really astonished at how much the people on the streets knew. So, I don't know. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about the
How I feel? I love it. I'm voting for him. I don't know. I love the fact that he invoked the book Natural Capitalism in his announcement speech. Gore called and said, would you support me? And I said, you didn't say anything about my book. Yeah. What's left?
Caveats in my mind, and that is considering outside the United States, where there is full employment of stars, there is not equitable wage. Along with that, is the fact that most business in the world is not corporate. Family trading companies that are $1 billion trading companies that are not corporations that trickle down into the network to network. So most of the world's business is not corporate business. And how do you communicate to different cultures of business and trading? Some of these families are mercantile families of that generation.
Centuries, actually, yeah.
So, in that sense, I'm finding a hole in the fabric in terms of redeeming the world.
Well, you're quite right. Corporate is not the right word. Oligarchy is the right word. And plutocracy. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And the corporations are an expression of that. And even if there isn't a corporation or it's a trading company, a Zaibutsu or whatever, in Asia, it's still an expression of oligarchy and plutocratic systems, which in some cases are indeed ancient. As your question is, what do I do about those cultures? I feel like that what we have to do is fix our own culture. And our culture, I can't tell you how many times highly placed people have said, like, boy, those Chinese all drive a car, we're in big trouble. I mean, or they all get refrigerators, they all get this, they all get that. And I always say to them, I said, does it strike you as being interesting that you have a life that you don't want anybody to emulate? You know? So it seems to me that rather than me as a fifth generation Californian to go into another culture, I mean, I work in other cultures, but I work only as to serve them. My work primarily is with the culture that is the main destroyer of life on Earth, which is the USA. And it's not just in fact, it's also in values. It's not just in values, it's in power. It's not just in power, it's in control. But it's just what I choose to do. It doesn't respond to your question because the answer is I have no idea how to change 1,000 years of Korean history or 2,000 years of Japanese tradition. I don't know. You see China becoming China 200 years ago right now. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we can play this all night because, I mean, I'm the expert on what's wrong and what's a bummer. We have a really great time together. Yes. How should people relate to the commons? It's so interesting because we have a language. You know, I mean, the industrial age, industrial movement, if you will, was very much sort of collusively connected to the enclosure movement, right? We live in a culture where our language talks about people who share the commons as commoners. It's a pejorative term. It's interesting, right? Commoners, like it's the less, right? Instead of honored. So I don't think we can go to our culture and find many lessons about governing the commons. There is an excellent book by, what's her name? I think it's Elizabeth. Her last name is Ostrow, O-S-T-R-W, called Governing the Commons. It's a beautiful book. And it's about her research over 30 years of what really works. And guess what? Most of the research took her to indigenous cultures because they have worked out much better feedback and mechanisms for self-governance that did cause the Garrett Hardin, greed of the tragedy of the commons, where the incentives were perverse for all the parties. And it was just a question of who did it first. And so her book, I think, is probably the best, and she still does research in this area. But what we do know is that what's present right now is that in terms of corporations, there is just overcapacity in the world. We can make too many cars, we can make too many chips. I mean, there's tremendous overcapacity. A third of Japanese manufacturing capacity needs to be written off. They won't do it. This is why their economy will never recover. If they write it off, they may never recover. So that's probably why they're not. But the fact is that we have too much productive capacity in the world. We are sitting on the precipice of a deflationary age. Now, so what happens when corporations have too much capacity is that they try to find new markets for new products. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're going to areas where we never even imagined they would belong, or go to, which is water. The draft agenda debitio was forbidding countries to prevent the privatization of their rivers and their lakes and their waters, right? So we're seeing a tremendous amount of money and investment going into water. Monsanto, DuPont, Novartis, et al., not too many alls there, but nevertheless, want to replace 7,000 seed companies with 4, right? And supply 90% of the germplasm for 90% of the caloric intake. This is a privatization of something that was common. Even if you had a small seed company and you sold it for money, it was really part of the commons. The seeds would grow every year. You didn't have to buy the seeds every year. We're seeing this we could see it in air in terms of even Kyoto. You have to be really careful about how that plays itself out. It could be good, it could be a disaster, depending on who wins and who loses. Since who's at the table is mostly big business and big government, we have to watch that really careful, because that could be a corporatization of another commons, the air. But what's happening is that business is moving to where it's never gone before, which is the commons. And so your question, I think, is extraordinarily apt, because we aren't prepared to deal with governing something that has largely been local or by custom or by tradition or by trust. A lot of it has been by trust, and that trust breaks down hugely when money and privatization enters in. And it's a really, really important issue. I'm glad you asked the question. In the back, yes.
One of the problems, obviously, with the market information happening is price
Right.
So it seems like
the question is about ecological tax reform or green taxes, and the questioner stated that one of the best ways, one of the problems with the so-called free market is that, of course, it has enormous incentives to externalize its costs on other people, generations, times, places, or whatever. And, of course, that's entirely true. Ecological tax reform, I'm sure most of you know, is about tax shifting as opposed to new taxes. It's about taking taxes away from the things we want to encourage, which are employment from people, and then placing a same amount onto a resource or waste stream that we want to either reduce or conserve, which is to say petroleum or energy. And so the result is that you send a different signal to the marketplace. For example, if gas was really $7 a gallon, which is approximately what it really costs, then we would have hybrid electric vehicles already. It wouldn't be, just there on the edges. And the reason is because we get the wrong information from our pricing system. My experience and my feeling about that right now is that there is tremendous work being done here. I speak at the University of Vermont Law Conference in December. Vermont is going towards tax shifting. Minnesota has. Europe is. I think it's actually a done deal, but just arduously slow, because the tax system is so weighted to vested interests, and it's a subsidy system, mostly to corporations. It's a corporate welfare system. So it's a really knockout, dragging fight, step by step by step. But I actually think it will happen, and one of the things that will accelerate it is the fact that the country that does do that first or moves faster actually will, in some ways, could place other countries at a disadvantage economically, which will accelerate the movement. In Sweden in 1996, 25 CEOs asked Ingmar Carlsson to implement green taxes, and these are CEOs of Electrolux and IKEA and the biggest oil company in Sweden. And they did it not because I'm not impugning their motives in any way, but they did it for practical reasons as well, because they thought this would give them a competitive advantage over countries who were asleep like us, and that as they raised the prices on resources, they would have incentives for technological improvements that they could export into other countries that subsidize their resources. So I actually am very hopeful about it. It's something that's so obviously right that it takes so long to get implemented. It is tough. I have one more question, and then I'm done. Yes? Yes. Well, in many ways, actually. That's a good question. Oh, the question was, I've been spending a lot of time being silent. How has it affected my work? Well, there isn't that much work. One of the things that came out of it was that I realized that 80 or 90% of what I do is useless. I wasn't going to say anything. And that was a very sobering change. Second of all, being silent makes you make you listen, but you start to listen in a different way. There's that great anecdote with Mother Teresa, when someone asked her about praying and what she says to God, when she prays, and she says, I don't say anything, I just listen. And the reporter said, well, what does God say? And she said, God doesn't say anything, she listens. So silence is about listening more to self and others, and so I listen more. And the third thing that's come out of it really is just a quandary about what to do, what I want to do, and I'm not sure what I know. I have to uprising. It's up. I do what I say I'm going to do and finish what I start. But there's a deeper question as to. And when I was silent in a way, I started to write to writers whom I really look up to. I call them the real writers, And Wendell Berry and W.S. Merwin and Terry Williams and so I asked them. I said, I want to be a real writer before I go. And Merwin had the best response. And he said, Paul, he said, the subject will make all the difference. And it really hit home because, natural capitalism is about toilets and light bulbs and, it's about forests and water too, but it was really such a technical book. And he also said that, and I think I can quote this fairly accurately, he said, writers of imaginative things, poetry, essays, fiction, all suffer from the same illusion that they know a truth because they have experienced something. But he said, in fact, there is no truth in the experience. The truth for those who write is in the telling of the story itself. And in the telling of the story, a truth emerges that even you didn't know. So those are some of the things I learned. You've been wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
I think I can say that on behalf of all of us in Montana and those of you that have traveled a long way to hear Paul and the other speakers we have this weekend, a real gift. Thank you very much, Paul.